Are you ready, Tom?
Yeah. Are you ready? Okay.
I like to.
Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 411th meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue, express a point of view. They had to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give them an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter, we listen only one fool at a time. That's one of our rules. And then we have questions and answers from the audience of the speaker, not speeches. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in the audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. And our speaker gets the last word, gets comment, and close the meeting. That's how it works. Before we introduce our speakers, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements they want to make? No, nobody has any announcements? No announcements. Do you want to talk about the Philosopher Club? You want to bring it
Our
up?
last meeting's on the 8th.
Well, come on up here.
Oops. Philosophers Forum's last meeting is on the 8th of May, which is next Tuesday. I think that's this coming Tuesday, as a matter of fact. And Tom even gives me a schedule. Ways of knowing what there is to be known, a reconsideration of science and religion. And coming from atheists, that sounds like they're going to be leaning towards the religious side a little bit. So that's the talk. It'll be our last one until September. So if you want to come for a little intellectual stimulation.
What forum is this?
Dallas Philosophers Forum. Yeah, we meet at the El Phoenix at Skillman, Adelia. Talk starts at 7:30. I'm usually setting up the AV by 5:45. So you can come at 6:30, have dinner, have some intellectual conversation with some other people that might like to discuss the same kind of thing.
Okay, any other announcements? That's about it. On May 12th, we're going to have political correctness, multiculturalism, and diversity in the age of Trump. That's on your itinerary. I'm not going to read all this. That's with Lloyd Chappell. He's a historian and economist. On May 19th, on the roots of concepts of debt and money is understood in the anthropological study of human social exchange. That's David Drum, JD. He'll discuss that. Ought to be interesting. May 26th, on the future of Latino vote being now, Robert Chavez, president of Tijuana's DFW, will discuss how the national elections and what's going on with Latino vote. Anyway, that's all on your itinerary here. I'm not going to read all this. Our speaker tonight is Gene Lantz. He's the Secretary of Alliance for Retired Americans. He also has a talk show on KNON, is it? Yes. On Saturday morning, 9 o'clock every Saturday. You may want to listen to it. And he takes calls coming in, so it's quite interesting. Anyway, he's going to discuss how Mayday 1886 shook the world and with strike actions, but the progressive movement is actually much stronger today and could potentially give the world a much more thorough shaking. He argues that even though the power is in our side, there are cracks in our solidarity that are holding us back. Gene predicts they won't hold us back much longer. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Gene Lantz.
You get to sing.
Okay, get back behind there.
Okay, but I want to hand these out. Just put a few over that way and a few over the other way. Yeah. That's
We're gonna have enough.
I think that'd be enough.
It'll be different colors.
They're all different, no, they're different.
Well,
All different.
Oh, this is.
they are different, but they all have solidarity forever.
Oh, I all have the song in there. That's it. The song is going to say here.
If you start out on another key, I'll just have to call you.
Okay.
There you go.
I never know.
Never know.
Yes,
Are you starting in a
This is
G?
what I'll do.
Hey,
I hope you pay attention to these lyrics. This is Labor's Anthem. It was written in 1915, and it was originally the first time they used it was in a march for Hull House, an immigrant center in Chicago, and the leader of the march was Lucy Parsons, who came from here. She came from Johnson County, just south of Fort Worth. And you don't usually hear this song unless you go to union meetings. And not even all unions play it. When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? Our union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Our union makes us strong. Now you do it. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Our union makes us strong. I happen to think that the words to this are quite profound. There's no power greater is the key to what I want to talk about tonight. Because I want to kind of assess how the union movement is doing, or how the labor movement is doing. This has been a peculiar week where all kinds of anniversaries happened. According to the AFL-CIO, this is Labor History Week. And according to my retiree group, it's Older Americans Month. And according to the nurses, it's Nurses Week. And as you know, Willie Nelson had his 85th birthday. I think that was Monday. Thank goodness we still have Willie. We do not have Pete Seeger anymore, but his birthday was Thursday. And Tuesday was International Workers' Day, which is celebrated all over the world, but usually not celebrated here. Oddly enough, though, they are starting to celebrate it here. There was not one but two picnics for the 1st of May this year. One of them was on Sunday and the other one was on Tuesday. I went to both of them. Today, of course, is Cinco de Mayo, where the Mexicans celebrate a big victory over French imperialism. And this is one you may not know. Today is the 200th birthday of Karl Marx. They're dedicating a big statue to him in his hometown in Germany. And this is a name that, hardly ever came up in America for a long time, but now people are kind of saying, well, what did he say? What was he thinking about?
There's a big one in Paris too. There was like the student uprising of '68 that they're
Yeah,
celebrating.
the uprising
And it
of
was,
'68, they're celebrating that in Paris, that's true. He was born in 1818. He was only 30 years old when he wrote the Communist Manifesto, which is one of the most read pieces of literature in the world, but usually not so much here. Marx said that in his own day, that capitalism was replacing the system that came before, which you could call serfdom, aristocracy, or they had serfs and they had nobles that pretty much ran things, and the capitalists were taking over. They had already taken over in England, and they were in the process of taking over in all over Europe. They had already taken over in France and of course here in the United States. But he also said that another system would come along and would replace capitalism. This other system was what he called socialism. And so, getting back to what Mark said, the question that I would like to evaluate is how are they doing? How's the working class doing? And the working class is not exactly the same thing as the labor movement. It's not exactly the same thing as organized labor. And it's certainly not the same thing as unions. But you can kind of look at unions to see how things are going for working people. There have been a great many upsurges in labor. For example, in I think it was 1878, the railroad people almost took over the country. There was a nationwide strike of railroad people. In 1898, I think it was, Eugene Victor Debs tried to organize all the railroad people into one union. I see Jeff Robinson looking down over there. Did I get the date right, or am I close? When Eugene Victor Debs tried to organize all railroad workers together. In about 1905, well, starting in 1901, there was a big socialist party in America, really big, much bigger than what we have now. And there was a very virile labor movement called the Industrial Workers of the World. And then, of course, in 1935, they formed the Congress of Industrial Organizations. That's when it was first put together. And that was a biggie. That's one that we have felt the effects of in our own lifetime. There was a big upsurge at the end of World War II that was part of the CIO particularly. And the one that we celebrated this year on Mayday was in 1886. And just to refresh your memories of what happened in 1886, there was a worldwide movement to win the 8-hour day. Because people normally worked 12 hours, and some of them were lucky enough to work only 10 hours. Some of them worked 16. They were trying to win the 8-hour day in 1886, and they called for strikes all over the world. There were, I understand, some in Texas, although I can't pinpoint them. But the center of this was in Tom's hometown, Chicago, Illinois. And this is one of the pictures they used. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will. They had a very good song, but I have never yet found the tune to it. I made up one, and sometimes I sing it, but I won't bore you with it. There was nevertheless a big upsurge. And on May the 1st in Chicago, some of the strikers at the McCormick Works, where they made harvesting machines, were shot down and killed. I think there were 4 of them killed. And then the local people put together a protest rally on May the 4th. And they did this at a little center where they traded, where people bought and sold hay. And it was called the Hay Market. So they met at the Hay Market to have a protest rally. The mayor came. It was a very decent thing. The police just stood around and watched them, and they had their speakers. And of course people raved on, I suppose. And for some reason they didn't call it off when it started to get dark. There were still some people there. And that's when the cops, for some reason, decided to attack them. And then a bomb was thrown. And so nobody knows how many workers were killed or wounded because they hid for cover. But 8 police died. We think as many as 8 policemen died from the bomb. So they rounded up everybody that was a leader of the 8-hour day movement, even though some of them weren't even there. Albert Parsons, the Texan, who was married to Lucy Parsons, wasn't even there. He spoke early and left. He was in a restaurant some miles away. And everybody knew that. But they rounded him up too, and they hanged him. They hanged the leaders of the 8-hour day movement. The same thing happened in every one of those other labor upsurges that I was telling you about. In 1878, the railroad men, they called out the army and shot them down. When Debs tried to organize all the railroad workers, they put him in prison. When the IWW began to organize everybody that moved, they busted that union, raided them in every way. They killed them, they deported them, and they put them in jail until they were almost non-existent. They still sort of exist. There's some students up in Denton that call themselves the IWW today, but it's not really what it was. And in 1935, when the CIO had their big upsurge that lasted until 1947, what happened in 1947? Taft-Hartley law. After that, the most militant and the people who had been leading this big upsurge were driven out of the unions. They were prohibited from serving in the unions. Some of them went to prison. And we had what we sometimes call the McCarthy period. The point I'm making is this. Every upsurge that working people have ever had in America was followed by government repression. Very, very serious government repression. And every time, labor backed up. After 1947, American unions became isolated. They pretty much quit doing anything that would provoke anybody. And they were what we call business unionists. In other words, they had lunch with the bosses, they played golf with the bosses, and they just tried to make the best deal they could make. But they never stirred up any trouble. And those students in Paris that you brought up, one of the things that made them the most angry was that the unions did not come to their assistance, did not help them. The same thing was true of the student movement here. Some of you probably were like me, probably protested the war in Vietnam. I know Mavis did, but you didn't see any union people. And there are probably some of you here that marched for civil rights. And you did see a few union people, but not very many. There were not much help. Union people were pretty much isolated. And that went on from 1947 until 1995. In 1995, they had an overthrow of the leadership. It wasn't a revolution. It was just they had their regular election, and the usual guys didn't get elected. Instead they had some more militant people that really wanted to start getting something done. The reason was because labor had begun to falter. There was one little sign that things were going to change. It happened in 1987. And this is when I pretty much came on the scene, because I had an opportunity to join Jobs with Justice, and I did. My wife and I formed the Jobs with Justice chapter here. Jobs with Justice was started by 5 of the most progressive unions. Not all 40 of them, but just 5 of them. And their job was to promote solidarity, not just between unions, but also with churches and civil rights groups and community groups and everybody else. In other words, to end labor's isolation. But at first, when Jobs with Justice was formed, the AFL-CIO treated them like outlaws. And that lasted until 1995. After they changed in 1995, then the AFL-CIO, the Labor Federation, began to adopt the same policies that the Jobs with Justice was doing. And today in Dallas, the AFL-CIO office over on Washington Street includes the Jobs with Justice office. In fact, Job with Justice and AFL-CIO are practically the same thing today. I want to tell just one personal incident about how profoundly different the labor movement became after 1995. I attended the AFL-CIO convention in 1997. This was the first convention after the new leadership. And I was standing around the Communist Party table. There were 3 or 4 people sitting at a table over there, and I was standing and talking to them just like I'm talking to you. And I had my back to the podium. And I heard somebody say behind me, I make a motion that we take the anti-communist clause out of the Constitution. The chairman said, is there a second? Somebody said, I second. The chairman said, is there any discussion? Then the chairman said, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. By the time I had turned around, they had completely reversed one of their main pillars of their ideology. They were totally anti-communist from 1947 to 1995. It was who they were. It was in their blood. It was everything they did was to be anti-communist. And then in a click of a moment, before I could even turn around, and those communists that were standing there, they didn't know either. They were just like this. They couldn't even believe it. Nobody saw this coming. The point I'm making is that there was a radical and a big difference that came out of the AFL-CIO elections in 1995. We don't necessarily see this because what's around us all the time is hard for us to see, hard for us to understand, to see where we are in history. We know a lot about history, but it's history is something that's 100 years ago, right? So we don't really see where we are now, which that's what I wanted to talk about. I tend to be a romanticist about labor history. I mean, I think LMA Wiggins was just the most wonderful person, and that we don't have anybody like that today. And the teachers all think Jimmy Hoffa was just a god. And the auto workers, they think Walter Reuther was just, you probably do too, don't you, Jeff? Jeff and I are both on the Auto Workers Union. So
George Meany.
George Meany was a big hero to some people. Looking back in the old days, and they say, boy, this was romantic. My personal favorite hero, and I've talked about him here in this forum, is Frank Little, who was one of the leaders of the industrial workers of the world. And I think, they don't have anybody like Frank Little anymore. We can never do that again because we're so weak today, and we're just a bunch of sissies. We'll never have anything like that again. But the truth is that if we evaluated things truthfully and honestly and looked at where we really are, we would see what I learned that night in 1997, because after they changed the anti-communist clause, after they took it out, I cornered the president of the trade union chairman of the Communist Party, a man who had been a leader of the CIO, a man who had organized tens of thousands of workers, a man who had been the president of one of the big national unions. And I said to him very quickly, I said, this is exciting. I think this is the most exciting thing that's ever happened in the labor movement. And he said, well, no. Then I realized who I was talking to. So I said, I'm sorry, I forgot that you were in the CIO, and that you were a leader of the CIO, and that you really saw great things in labor. He said, no, You're wrong. He said, it's better now. This is better than anything we had in the 1930s. The labor movement is stronger now than ever before. That's what he told me in 1997. And that caused me to reevaluate all of my romantic ideas about the American labor movement. The truth is, we are stronger now. We are stronger now than we have ever been. And I know you're thinking, how can that be? Because most of us know how many members were lost over the last 70 years or so. In 1955, they had 35% of all American workers were union members. More than 1 in 3 workers were all had a union. And there were unions for everything. And today, it's maybe 11%. We've lost that many members. It's not that we lost them because they became disaffected. We actually lost their jobs right out from under them. Those jobs disappeared. Some of them went overseas and some of them were automated. Some of them were being done by machines. So we're much smaller as a percentage. The union movement is much smaller as a percentage of the working class than it used to be. But don't forget, I told you at the beginning, the unions are not the working class. It's not the same thing. They're an important part of it, but they're not the whole thing. So why do I say then that unions are stronger today than they have ever been? One of the simple reasons is automation. Because a worker today produces the same wealth as 4 workers did at the end of World War II. So if a worker today walks off the job, it's just as if 4 of them had walked off the job. When I took my job as I used to be what they call a tape machinist at LTV. In other words, my machine was run by tape, paper tape. And then later on they used vinyl tape or plastic tape of some kind. And then later on they just started using it directly from the computer without using any tape. But anyway, in the tape mills, they told us when I took the job, you are replacing 16 regular machinists. And before I retired, they had some other new machines, and they told us that each one of those machines is replacing 5 of us. So that's a lot of people. That are a lot of work that is concentrated in one worker. So one worker walks off the job, it's as if at least 4 workers had walked off the job back then. But that's not the main reason that I think we're so much more powerful today. The main reason I think we're so much more powerful today is because of that telephone in your pocket. That telephone in your pocket is a more powerful computer than we could buy back in the 1990s. And it's a communication device, the likes of which has never existed in human existence. In some places, they are overthrowing governments among people who hardly even know each other. They're not forming a secret Bolshevik group and having thousands of meetings and passing out leaflets and stuff. They're putting it on Twitter, and everybody's getting it. And just to emphasize how strong labor can be, let me just give you 2 words. School teachers. Is that one word? In 5 states, they have racked up major gains. Now, I know that the unions are coming up and saying, oh, yeah, we did that. But they didn't. They did not. Those people organized themselves. The unions jumped in front of it and said, oh, yeah, I'm the one that did this. But they didn't. Because they're too afraid to. The law would not have permitted them to. That's why there's not one in Texas. Texas teachers are not allowed to strike. And if the union called a strike, they'd be going to jail. So they're not going to call a strike. However, some of the teachers might. The one in West Virginia, for example, started when 2 teachers got together and put a Facebook page up. It was just 2 of them. And before they went on strike, they had 24,000 friends on that Facebook page. I don't know how many teachers there are in West Virginia, but this is a bunch of them. So, and also, it wasn't just the teachers. For one thing, it was all the school employees that came together. Because the teachers didn't just say, we want a raise. They said, we want more money for all the schools. They had a lot of support from the bus drivers and the crossing guards and the cafeteria workers. And they had the students with them. The students were dying to walk out. They had the parents with them. I talked to the guy who organized their fundraising, and he said, well, I'm just a parent. But as soon as this started, I organized the fundraising. He raised $380-something thousand in 1 week because the whole world was really on their side. And really all they had to do was find out about it, and they started sending money. And then it caught on in other states. Arizona, this week, the teachers got a 20% increase in pay, and the whole school system is getting more money. In Arizona. The states where this is happening are some of the worst states. Some of the states that have had Republican legislatures for the longest period of time and have had the most cuts and had the lowest salaries. So I think that backs up what I'm saying, that labor is stronger, the working people are stronger than they have been. I don't know if that means Karl Marx was right and that, and that something wonderful is about to happen in the next day or two or something like that. But I do think that we are stronger than we have ever been. That's my argument. And everybody gets a chance to come up and argue back and forth, But Tom's going to let me speak last, so don't forget. This is what Eugene Victor Debs said during his lifetime, when people said labor is finished. This is a quote. 10,000 times has the labor movement stumbled and bruised itself. We have been enjoined by the courts, assaulted by thugs, charged by the militia, traduced by the press, frowned on in public opinion, and deceived by politicians. But notwithstanding all this and these, labor is today the most vital and potential power this planet has ever known, and its historic mission is as certain of ultimate realization as is the setting of the sun. Eugene Victor Debs. So, while Marx was alive, he got very excited because there was a small socialist revolution during his lifetime. And some people consider this the first socialist revolution. I don't, because I think the first socialist revolution was in Haiti. But in 1871, because of the way the war was going, the army abandoned Paris. And the people in Paris took over and ran things democratically. And they called it communal. They call this a communal government. And so it's gone down as history as the Paris Commune. But as I said earlier, every time the workers rise and begin to make some progress, there's going to be a serious repression from the government. What happened was that the army came back and killed them all, stacked them up like cordwood all over the curbs of all along the streets and avenues of Paris. But there was one guy named Eugene, I can't pronounce it. It might be Potier. It's P-O-T-T-I-E-R. Anybody here know French?
Poitiers.
Potier. He wrote a poem, and he survived and got to England. I think he knew Marx, and I think Marx's son-in-law was a friend of his or something. But anyway, his poem was eventually set to music and became a French song, which has been translated over and over and over again all over the world. I believe it is probably the most popular song in the world. Maybe the most popular song the world has ever known. But you probably have never heard it, because this is America. But I thought you might be interested in it, so I'm going to ask Tom to hand some out. And that's just one version. As I said, it's been translated over and over again. There are about 10 versions. It's on Wikipedia. There are about 10 versions in English. But this is the only one I know. And it's sometimes referred to as the American version. We'll have to do this without the fiddle. And I can't really tell you the tune, but you have the words in front of you anyway. You can follow along the best you can. Arise, ye prisoners of starvation. Arise, ye wretched of the earth. For justice thunders condemnation. A better world's at birth. No more traditions chains shall bind us. Arise, ye slaves, no more in thrall. The earth shall rise on new foundations. We have been naught, we shall be all. 'Tis the final conflict. Let each stand in their place. The international working class shall free the human race. 'Tis the final conflict. Let each stand in their place. The international working class shall free the human race. Now I think it's next is questions, right?
Yeah. You can just
Okay,
stay
now I really get roasted. Next is questions, and then after that you get to take the mic, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who wants to be first?
Jane,
I'm listening.
I wonder, is the progressive movement the same thing as socialism? And is that, or is that just for the union workers? Or are there other issues that they believe in? I don't understand how it all fits together.
You know, I've been thinking about writing an essay on that. In fact, I think I did write something on it. GeneLantz.org is where I blog. I write all kinds of stuff there. And I also put things on lilyscola.us. But anyway, we have a lot of words that we're not clear about. For example, what's a liberal? And if a liberal is somebody that believes everybody should be happy and be a big soft person, then what's a neoliberal? Because that's, Ronald Reagan was a neoliberal, and nobody ever called him a liberal. What's a conservative? What's a reactionary? And what's a progressive? To me, I'll just give you my answer because these things I think get very confusing. What's a left wing? What's a right wing? In the Paris Revolution and the French Revolution of 1789. When was that? The people who sat on the left were the ones who wanted to be more democratic, and the ones who sat on the right were the ones who wanted to go back to the way things were. So we call people leftists and rightists, and we don't even know what it means. But to me, a progressive is someone who is looking for a better future. And that means more democracy to me. It means more that people will have more say-so about what happens in their lives. And a reactionary is somebody who doesn't. So I use the terms progressive and reactionary quite a lot. And I try to avoid all these other words because they don't know what they mean. And what's a neoconservative? And how's a neoconservative different from a neoliberal? And they're both for free trade. Okay, does that answer? I'm sorry, I couldn't really be very clear.
I believe you support policies that would create more jobs for people, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, under Trump, we've had the lowest unemployment rate for blacks and the lowest unemployment rates, I think, ever for a lot of other things.
Since 2000, since 2000.
Well, at least since then. I think it's the lowest unemployment rate ever for blacks.
Oh, maybe so.
Yes, and I believe there's a job creation is going way up. The stock market has gone sky high over the past couple of year and a half, 2 years. So do you support Trump?
No. I have a little problem about the jobs too. For one thing, a lot of people are not in the workforce. A lot of people got out of the workforce since the last recession started. So the figures are a little skewed. But what really is chapping me, there's a headline I saw, and I think it was the day before yesterday in the paper. It said that unemployment is, it was Friday, because that's when unemployment figures come out. It said unemployment is down, and we are hoping for increases in wages. And I've been seeing headlines like that for the last couple of years, because unemployment's been coming down for quite some time. And people have had more money. The per capita wealth in America is just astounding. It's gigantic. And so they like, for example, in December they passed the tax bill. Well, the bosses are going to have a lot more money now, so we can expect to see wages go up, right? They're not going up.
Yeah, they are.
They are.
Not much.
And they're giving out $1,000 bonuses. Some of them too.
I saw, I'm talking about an article that was in the paper day before yesterday. That said,
Today.
no, yesterday, Friday's paper. That said wages are not going up. That said we're hoping they will, but they're not significantly. Especially, you take inflation
Net
out
pay
of
is
it.
going up, because the taxes are going down. Net pay is up.
This is a question.
I know.
When you talk about, how very active people were in the union, 100 years ago, and, I was talking about, why are they so active when they're so active and we today aren't? And I was wondering if it's because today we are all just so contentedly in debt. That, that 100 years ago, there was no such thing as a credit card. So when they needed a washing machine, they couldn't go out and charge it. There was no such thing as, student loans, so they just didn't go to school.
Mhm.
And I just kind of wonder if what makes us that this steady line of credit, this bondage, that we put ourselves into in the bank, isn't just a big pacifier, and it keeps us from really getting actively involved. Because if people could not get a loan for a car, I feel like, they might, say, I need higher wages to buy a car.
Yeah.
I think, the debt that Americans are so contentedly doing to themselves is just a panacea, that they're just gobbling up, so.
Debt really keeps people from taking action.
Yes, we
Especially
agree
strike,
that
especially strike action.
Wow.
I agree with you, but didn't I see you on January 21st, 2016? I'm pretty sure I did.
I don't know where.
On the streets of Dallas.
I've been to some.
I bet I saw
protests.
Charlotte there. There were so many of us that you couldn't all, we didn't recognize each other. I bet Mavis was there. You started off by saying, that we're not doing as much today as we were doing. On January 21st of 2016, we had the biggest protest day in American history. There were 500,000 in Chicago and 500,000 in New York. I don't know, Mavis might know. But when you added it together, It was way, way bigger than the Vietnam anti-war movement. You know how many protests there are about I don't want to get off on guns, but the National Rifle Association is downtown right now. There's 12. I know of 12 different demonstrations against it. And I've been crying about it all day because they can't seem to get together. You know, there's one across town, one over at the Unitarian Church, another one up at City Hall. You know, but there's 12 of them today and tomorrow. That's just the ones I know about. So there's an upsurge going on. I think the reason it's not effective is because it's all over the place. It's you can't find 3 people that agree, you know, on something. And there are all these little, like for example, May 1st. I was tickled to death to find out that there was going to be a May 1st picnic this year, because I don't think it's ever had one in Dallas. Not since I've been here. I've been here since '78. I know back in '84 I had some time because I was fired from my job, and so I organized May 1st. I got the food, I got the sound system, I rented the facility. I went down there early in the morning and I waited, and no person ever came. Not a single one.
Wow.
It rained, but nevertheless, no one even came down there to comfort me. So I was tickled to death to learn that there was going to be a May 1st picnic. Then I found out there was going to be another one. So I started calling them. I said, why don't you guys get together? You're both celebrating the same thing. Oh yeah, well they've got that other group over there. You know, we're not going to meet with them. You don't expect us to meet with them, do you? And these are not ideological people. They don't know beans about. They don't even know what May 1st is. You know, they never even heard Solidarity Forever. You know a lot more than they do about the labor movement, but they would not work together, and so we ended up with 2 picnics. They were both pretty good. I went to both of them, but and I was really, really glad to have something here. But we are not getting together. We are all over the place. Who's got the mic?
I have
Oh,
one.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
A couple of short questions. Number one, you mentioned that you read in the newspaper that wages were not going up. My question is, which newspaper?
Dallas Morning News.
Okay.
That's
Because,
New York Times.
yeah.
Yeah, well, what's his name? The economist that writes in the New York Times? Paul Kruger. He wrote really extensively about why wages are not going up.
Well, he's insane.
Okay.
People tend to read what they like to see. Secondly, it sounds to me like you don't like the form of government that we have. Would you want to rewrite the Constitution or cause government to come back and follow that Constitution?
Rewrite the Constitution.
Well, you want a socialist form of government, it sounds like. Would you want to
So-
rewrite the Constitution to allow a socialist form of government rather than a democratic republic, a representative democracy?
Is that going to be your only question?
No, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, then I'll answer. Because I don't want to get grilled.
You're not getting grilled.
Socialism is not a form of government. It's an economic system. We always get confused about that here in America. We say, are you for socialism or are you for democracy? Are you for, but they never say capitalism versus socialism. If you asked if people prefer capitalism to socialism, a lot of young people would pick socialism, and it's growing. The trend is growing that way. Those kids that did those picnics, you know, they would never have done that a few years ago. They were nearly all young people. I was twice as old as anybody else there. So yeah, I'm for socialism. I think I'm for an extension of democracy. And my idea is that socialism we would have the ability to make decisions about more things that affect our lives, like whether or not to go to war, who's going to get laid off, whether or not to allow the companies to pollute, things like that, that we would actually have some direct say-so. And I think because of those phones in your pocket, that we could actually organize that now, whereas I think in the past you probably couldn't have. It would have been very hard to organize a vote on just every little thing back in the old days, but I think you could now. I think that legislatures could propose things and everybody could put in their password and vote on it and get it done in a day, and the computers would be able to add them up. So yeah, I'm for advanced democracy, but what you asked me really is interesting to me, because I've been some kind of activist for over 50 years. And for most of that, I've considered myself a socialist. For most of that, I've considered myself a revolutionary. But I have always ducked the question of what would it look like. In fact, I never knew anybody that didn't duck that question. I ran for Congress one time for the Socialist Workers' Party. I was the Socialist Workers' Party candidate. I got 150 votes. But anyway, I did a lot of interviews, and people would ask me, well, what does this look like? What do you really want? And I always ducked it, and so did everybody else I knew. I always said, well, I'm not going to try to tell people, I'm not going to dictate to people what they want to do. This will be up to those people, and they will make those decisions. But really,
That's not socialism.
really, I was ducking the question. I should have some kind of idea. So I started 2 years ago. I saw something online that said, write a novel in 30 days. It had to be in December. I think it was for school teachers that have a lot of time off on December. But in my union, I had a lot of time off in December too. So I wrote a novel in 30 days. And my novel was about a guy who lives in the period right after capitalism has just kind of fallen apart. They still don't really know what they're going to do, but things have just fallen apart. The pollution has gotten so bad that people can't breathe anymore. There's another economic crisis, and wars have devastated the planet, And so nearly all science fiction, by the way, is dystopian here in America. We all predict what's going to happen in the future is horrible. You can't find, with the exception of Star Trek, nearly all science fiction is dystopian in America. In Star Trek, they figured out how to do everything, but they won't tell you how they did it. They just kind of jump from where things are now, and then the Vulcans come, and then everything gets great, and they have everything figured out. But so I had to start figuring out, well, what would it look like? What would happen? And I decided, for one thing, everybody would be able to vote with their phones. And I decided that, well, the revolution wouldn't have even happened if everybody hadn't gotten organized. So everybody would be in some kind of organization. So I thought, well, these organizations would put forward their ideas, and then they would get voted on by larger and larger groups until they finally were voted on, at the national level, and then people would make their decisions that way. And oddly enough, the first thing I put down was that they would stop burning fossil fuels. And I just threw that in, just made it up. And so everybody was riding around on bicycles and trying to find a bicycle or a unicycle or something. And since I'm from southeastern Oklahoma, my first novel takes place there, and everybody rode horses. And then that kind of ruined the novel, because I don't really know that much about horseback riding. And I had to talk about this guy who was learning to ride horses. Anyway, my point is this, that I don't know. I don't know exactly how everybody would solve all the problems, but I know what some of the problems are. War, pollution, cyclical economics, where we have these downturns that are really, really bad, layoffs, misunderstandings, racism, chauvinism. I know what some of the problems are, but trying to figure it out in my science. I'm on the third one now. And in the third one, he runs for office, my hero. He runs for office, and so he really has to start answering questions like you just asked me. And so the answer that he doesn't have an answer, he just has to ask somebody else. But my answer to you is I'm working on it. I'm trying to figure it out. But I don't really know. I don't even know how a revolution might come about. I think everybody getting organized. I know what's happened in, what's that first country that they had the Arab Spring?
Egypt.
No, it's before that. Tunisia. They organized that on Facebook. And then the rest of them, they organized that on Facebook and Twitter. And right now in Iran, they're having this big fight over a phone app called Telegram. And everybody wants to use Telegram, and the dictators over there don't want them to. So they're arguing about whether or not they can use the stuff. The dictator's saying, no, you guys, you want to use this because you're going to organize big demonstrations against us. Because that's what they think they have been doing. So you can kind of see some stuff happening. These things, what's going on with the school employees right now? We would never have been able to imagine that, because we knew they were prohibited from going on strike. We knew the unions could not call those actions, and yet the actions took place. They actually went around the unions, and the unions jumped back in front and said, well, we'll negotiate the solution. But the truth is, they didn't do it. So I think things like that are almost incomprehensible. I would never have predicted it, but it happens. It's happening. Happened in Arizona this week, maybe in North Carolina next week. I can tell you what the industrial workers of the world thought. They thought that they were going to get everybody into unions. They had this big chart of I think it was 13 categories of unions, and then they were going to have unions under each of these 13 categories. It was like a wheel at the. And after everybody got into the union, they were going to call a strike one day. And then capitalism would just completely fold, and the unions would start running everything. That's what they thought. That's what they intended to do. They were revolutionaries. They weren't really unionists. They weren't trade unionists in the same sense that, for example, I am. I'm taking too much time.
No.
So next question.
Well, my question is, you did a historical rundown of organized labor in the United States. I was a senior in high school in 1955 when the CIO and the AFL merged one year.
Talk directly into it.
In 1955, CIA and the AFL merged as one unit.
Mm-hmm.
There was a great deal of expectation from that, but it seemed like unions actually began to decline at that time. Why not? Why did you reach what those thought?
Well, that's not when they began their decline. They began their decline when Taft-Hartley passed. But they didn't really start losing. They had momentum. They were still gaining members until, I think, 1955. I think that the merger of the AFL and the CIO was a great accomplishment of American labor. However, I also think that the AFL had the final say-so, and the CIO, the things that the CIO had been doing were just given up. The CIO, for example, organized unions. The AFL does not organize unions, it's just a federation. And they gave that up. CIO gave that up when they merged. And there is an organizing department of the AFL, but you couldn't hardly tell it. They don't seem to get much done. The individual unions do their own organizing, unfortunately, with no help from the other unions. So my opinion is that it was a good thing that they got together, but it could have been done better. Do you know who Roy Evans was? Did you live here back in those days?
I didn't.
Roy Evans was president of my local union at one time, and then he became president of the CIO in Dallas. And then he became president of the CIO in Texas. And then when they merged, he became president of the AFL-CIO. A couple of years later, Walter Reuther of the Auto Workers Union decided to leave the AFL-CIO. So they told Roy Evans, you have to step down. You can't be the president of the Texas AFL-CIO because you're an auto worker and we're getting out. So he had to get out of the union. He was essentially kicked out of the UAW in order to maintain his position with the Federation. Bad things like that happen.
My question, it may be for you, it may be for Tom. Tom is always promoting the 6-hour day, work day.
Mm-hmm.
How would that play out? How would that make a difference?
I have a feeling you're going to hear from Tom about the 6-hour workday. In my science fiction novel, they are not ready to lower the working hours because they've just been through this cataclysmic, terrible. A lot of people have died, and there's disease and pollution, and things are really, really bad. But my candidate, he's going to be a candidate in my third novel. He's going to get asked that question, and he's going to say that since productivity keeps going up, that we should lower the working hours along with productivity. See, if we had have done that back at the end of World War II, we wouldn't have lost all these jobs. Because when one person can do twice as much work, produce twice as much wealth, then they're going to lay off one guy, aren't they? In fact, I wrote a poem about that once. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but they gave me a coffee cup and laid off some other guy. It's a poem about suggestion boxes. When productivity goes up, somebody gets laid off. We just tend to keep losing jobs. We did it ourselves because we're going to those suggestion boxes and helping management to increase productivity. So what they should have done, in my little feeble mind, is they should have recognized that automation is going to take jobs away from us. So we should have an index and lower the working hours every time we get an increase in productivity. The same way we do with inflation. Inflation used to just kill people because you'd be making $100 a week and you'd think that was just fine, and then the inflation would go through the ceiling and $100 wouldn't even buy a pack of cigarettes. So we invented COLA, cost of living increases. And lots of union people have COLA. And seniors have COLA on our Social Security. Cost of living advance. And it's not a lot. It's never as much as Medicare, but we do have it. And it is a lot better than just letting inflation kill you. So we could have done the same thing. We could have indexed in productivity and lowered the working hours the same way that we indexed inflation to increase our wages when inflation came. But nobody thought of that, and they certainly didn't do it. But if we had of, at the end of World War II, I've got figures to show this, that a person in 2009, that's when my figures got up to, was making 4 times as much wealth in an hour as someone working back in 1945. So that means instead of working 8 hours, they could have been working 2. And the same amount of wealth would have been created. So I'm not just for the 6-hour day. I'm for lowering the working hours as productivity rises. But it will never work. People don't like it. Out where I worked in the airplane factory at LTV, I was a union activist, and I used to notice, I used to kind of count things, you know, because I was the editor of the paper. And I counted the grievances. And I found that overtime grievances were the #1 kind of grievances that we had. And I thought, well, that makes sense. People are like me, they don't want to come to work. They would rather do something else, so they're trying to get out of this forced overtime. And I was completely wrong. Those grievances were from people trying to get more overtime. They were dying to get more overtime. If you would have let them, they would have worked 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. Because they were piling up the money and doing what that sister back there said, running up the debt. And so even though I think I have the answer on productivity and working hours, I don't think people would accept it. Not in the current world. People don't want to work fewer hours. They'd like to get more money. The overtime law that we have now, you know, doesn't stop people from being forced to work overtime. But it does provide that they get more money if they work overtime.
We have someone like a multi-billionaire, George Soros, influencing all the news media right now and printing whatever he wants to, really. He said openly he wants to destroy our country. I've read it several times. And he influences various groups. They get paid handsomely to do what he wants.
I'm sorry, you said he was local? I thought he was,
I didn't use the word local.
oh, I'm sorry.
I said
He's from Europe?
multi-billionaire.
He's a Russian or something?
I believe he's got a place in New York.
Hungarians.
Bulgarian? Hungarian.
But he lives in New York.
But he's rich as heck, right? I tried to get some of that Soros money for Jobs with Justice, and we didn't get any. I don't know. Was there a question in there?
What do you think about people reading news media? People reading the news and knowing that it's controlled by a liberal man who says he wants to control, he wants to destroy our country.
Rupert Murdoch.
I'm sorry?
Rupert Murdoch
No, George Soros.
is the most reactionary, conservative person. George Soros doesn't control the media.
Yeah, Rupert Murdoch owns the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, I recommend a book called Dark Money.
Oh, I heard
That Dark Money is a really, really good book.
Who
It's
wrote
really
it?
worthwhile. Somebody who writes for the New Yorker. I don't remember the name. It's a woman, but it's very well researched. But I don't remember if she talks about Soros or not. But I know I tried to get some of his money one time and did not.
You get to sit down.
Ah, thank you.
Well, now it's your, excuse me, it's your turn to talk. So whoever wants to say something here, you got 5 minutes to either speak for or against what the speaker had to say. So you're up. Who wants to be first? I can't believe this. We don't have a first? Nobody wants to say anything?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Well, come on up
I
here.
don't dare say it.
Well, come on up here. This is your opportunity to say what you want. That's what free speech is all about.
Yeah, yeah.
I know.
We're waiting patiently for you. You know, come on up here.
Go, Ken.
Let's do it.
All right, I can see something to say. I find it interesting that people who supposedly fight for better wages for workers and stuff like that, when Trump turns the economy on, brings the steel industry back from near death, we have hundreds of thousands of jobs, 200,000 jobs, I think, last month, being created regularly. Wages are going up. As soon as the tax cut was announced, a whole bunch of companies, I mean dozens of them, gave their workers $1,000 bonuses, and many of them raised their wages as soon as their taxes were cut. I find it very interesting that when things like that happen, a progressive brothers and sisters refuse to acknowledge that this is exactly what they've been fighting for. And Trump is making it happen without any union involvement.
Amen.
Who's next? I can't believe this. Who's next? Come on up here, Jim. Or, here comes
Calvin.
Kelvin.
Calvin.
Well, you can go.
I'm
standing in for you. I enjoyed your presentation of all the interest in labor unions. My experience with labor unions has been positive, even though I was only a member of labor union a short period of time. I worked in the public sector. My brothers were part of unions in manufacturing industry. Unions, I use an example of a paradigm of Beaumont, Texas. How many people know where Beaumont, Texas is?
Wait a minute.
Yeah, that's where the Spindletop was, right out of Beaumont. But anyway, I worked in summers in Beaumont for a wholesale warehouse, a grocery company. And it was a very racist community. But they had a congressman named Jack Brooks, who was one of the only few congressmen that voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So labor unions, and Houston labor unions were strong, and they did some things that didn't take place in other places. I've heard here, so I understand some of the things you're saying, but we argue about Soros and what he does for liberals, but we forget about the Koch brothers and what they do for conservatives. The Tea Party was basically funded by them, and he gave them so much a day to go and rally. So you don't say anything about that.
Yeah, you do.
I haven't heard it here.
I read it constantly.
So, we do have on both sides people with money, and our government really is controlled by multinational corporations because they determine basically who's going to be elected and what they're going to do. It's something need to happen to wake Americans up. But I think the biggest barrier to it is like you indicated, these different groups meeting on the same issue and they can't agree on what the real issues are. And that's happening, so we are somewhat divided and conquered as a citizen. And we don't get really concerned until something hits us. When it's hitting someone else, that's them, not us. But we got to get beyond this, what I call minutia on issues, and we ought to be all concerned about creating a level playing field where everybody can, if they choose to, can be successful. That the education system should be better so everybody can get an education. Because the way the economy is right now, if you don't have a skill, a trade, or a profession that's needed, you're going to be very marginalized. And a large number of people who worked in manufacturing industry right now don't have the skills. And I don't hear anybody saying, let's provide some retraining for these people so that they can participate. And when everybody talk about what President Trump has done in a year and a half, you must have forgotten about where in the United States, where the country was in 2009, where the stock market was in 2009, and where it had come to before 2016. It's not, he passed a tax cut law, and I did an analysis and made a presentation here about it. For people earning $50,000 or more, you're gonna pay more. You're gonna pay more. People earning $50,000 or more are gonna pay more. You're gonna get. I'm in that group. I'm paying more. They started implementing it in January, and so you're gonna pay more. And when you're gonna really, you want to feel the real impact when you file the income tax for 2018. Then we're gonna have a lot of angry people. We'll have a lot of angry people because we'll see into if what I'm correct or wrong in 2018. Most of us probably still around me. But he passed a law. I don't know anything. I don't see steel mills hiring. My brother worked in steel. I don't see steel mills hiring. The company that he got to say they're going to keep 50% of their employees, Ohio, the city and the state had to make money to help them retool the factory. What they were doing is digitize the factory, and most of the people are going to be laid off. And I hear some of that going on. AT&T gave everybody $1,000, but they're going to lay off a bunch of people. And most of the other companies are too. So, I mean, I don't see anything, to me, to deal with the problem we have in the United States. We got to retrain people for the jobs that exist. And I don't hear nobody say anything about that. And we encourage people to spend everything they earn. And then when they have a little, anything and happen to them, they lose a job, their wife loses a job, they lose everything. And that's why we had to study in 2016 that white men between age 45 and 55 had the highest mortality rate of any demographic group, is because they worked in unionized jobs, made good salaries, they were trained a skill. My brother worked in steel, he was trained a skill. When he closed the steel mill and outsourced the job, there's no need for it. They have to be retrained. They lost everything. And that's why they got on drugs and booze and committed suicide, because they had never had to deal with that before. And I don't see nobody dealing with that. I don't see President Trump doing that. So that's what I'm concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you.
The steel industry, along with many other industries, got shipped out of the United States basically because of the passage of NAFTA and GATT treaties that eliminated tariffs. Tariffs were set on the importation of products so that even though they may have been manufactured by slave labor, and hence there's a much huger profit margin in them, they will sell for an equivalent amount to an equal product in the United States to make trade more even. And that's what Trump is trying to go back to. That worked for us. And we need to get rid of GATT and NAFTA very quickly. And the major thing we need to get rid of is a Federal Reserve System and go back to letting the Treasury print our money with no interest. Because that's a private bank that has no reserves, that's not federal, and our national debt is from borrowing money from that bank. And all they do is print it up or enter it on a computer. They have no assets to make that money. And yet we've been living off of this. I've said this before. Thomas Jefferson made a statement similar to, if we let a private bank get control of our money, that through inflation and deflation and the corporate structure that will grow up around that bank, they will steal all the property from our descendants and leave them homeless in the land that we have founded. Again, I think he was a time traveler from today back then to plant that seed in human consciousness. I think the system that we have in the Constitution has been largely abandoned because of the huge amount of money with the focus on capitalism rather than free enterprise that was the idea that built this nation to such a powerful state. The greed that has led to the idea of capitalism being our form of economics and even government is really a misdirection of where we should be going. I don't think it's right that a CEO will get his huge salaries and then walk away with a $100 million bonus every year. This kind of thing goes on all the time. Now, how much are the workers being paid? What could, 90 million of that do for them? And so forth. I mean, it's quite obvious. We are a country that was based upon the principle of one creator, in that all men are created equal. Now, Yuri Bezmenov, as I have mentioned, in a book that he wrote, an interview that he was in, he was a KGB agent involved in trying to convert India to communism. Went on to say that the first step in trying to convert a nation to communism is tearing down the moral fiber. And that includes eliminating this belief in God and an almighty creator. And interestingly, the person in recorded history, the first leader of a nation to declare to his people there is only one God, and that God is love, is the one for whom we say Amen at the end of the prayers that we have. Amenhotep IV, or Tutankhamun, he was also known as. They had a kingdom that lived, I won't even say a kingdom, they had a society that lived on the principles of always speak the truth to everyone, always treat everyone in a kindly manner, and 5,000 years that lasted, based on these spiritual principles. Now, they were not Christians, but what is Christianity but a closer defining of a lot of things that we were instructed to learn and practice, starting with the most important part of human existence and of the Creator is divine love that we must express in all the things that we do for all our fellow man. That's where we need to revolve back. And all of these movements like Soros, everything he's done is intended to divide this nation into conflicting little parts so that it can be controlled by people who control all of these emotional issues that are being created. This man has destroyed more nations by putting in a black government and funding a revolution for them. He's an evil, evil man, and he needs to be in prison. And there are a lot of people in our government, I think, need to be in prison as well. The wars that we've been carrying out in the Middle East, and it's just some of the biggest crime in human history to murder so many people. And like the drone bombing of a wedding party, killing off the people at the wedding party. That's happened several different times in the Middle East. These things are intolerable. The use of spent uranium in shells that then leave this radioactive material out in the environment, and thousands of children, and I guess it's Iraq, being born deformed today, and all kinds of illnesses and so forth. We need to form ourselves into groups that will take back the control of the government. The original and real title of the Constitution is the Constitution for the United States of America, not of the United States of America. The subtle difference being the people wrote that Constitution to create and enable and control their government, and if they need to, get rid of the damn thing and do another one. It's not a constitution of the government to rule the people. And this is the subtlety that they use in so many different ways to control human consciousness. And we need to wake up to this. And I'm not opposed to unions. I don't see where true socialism has been all that successful in life. I look at the National Socialist Party in Germany under Hitler. That didn't work out too well. I think the best example that I can think of, which will be 180 degrees the opposite of what you've seen on TV and read in all the newspapers in the United States, was what Gaddafi did in Libya. He took, with a military power, he took control of that country and stopped the warring of two major tribes. It had been going on for so long, the country was just decimated. And he formed a tribal council and said, all of you people will stop fighting, otherwise our military is going to come in and stop you from it. And you'll go to this tribal council and you'll all vote on solving your issues in an intelligent, logical manner. And he nationalized the oil industry, made the Hunt brothers real angry, and used 49% of the revenues to run the country and 51% dispersed to the tribes for their people. Free education, free medical, all the way through, even if they had to send someone to a foreign country for medical treatment, a family member went with them, the government paid it all. Same with education. This is the kind of thing that we could do here, but we've got to reenact, I mean, they're lying dead and dormant, the antitrust laws, because we have a pharmaceutical industry that is dictatorial to Congress. A petroleum industry, and incidentally, there's no such thing as fossil fuel. The earth manufactures it through heat pressure and chemicals under the earth. The fields refill after they've been drained for a while. But we need to get off of petroleum as well, because we have had free energy for decades and decades. 100 years, all the way back to Nikola Tesla, but also through back-engineered stuff from things like the Roswell crash. Read The Day After Roswell by Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso. We have lots and lots of ability to stop the pollution of this planet and to make it a very harmonious place to live for everybody. And we're in a leadership position, we ought to begin to do that. But it's not going to come from government. It's not going to come from creating a socialist government. It's going to come from the people, starting at the local level and expanding it from there, to take control back like our founding fathers intended us to have.
Well, I missed the talk, but that's never stopped me commenting. We are America divided, and we need to be America united. And I think the confusion is over what our common enemy really is. We have so much corruption in both parties and in almost every industry. The banking was mentioned. Federal Reserve is an abomination. It's always been an abomination. It was passed through fraud and deception, and we need to get rid of that. But we've also got the very things that we're arguing over, benefits in a medical industry that is completely out of control. And why don't we have cures? I've been hearing about cures for diabetes for decades. That never seems to make it to the marketplace. Cures for cancer. Here's our problem. Cancer is a billion-dollar industry. So who is being served here? We have a corrupt elite who have lost touch with the needs of the people. This is in both parties. It crosses all politics. And that is a problem that has to be addressed. The only way I know how to address it is to become more and more independent myself. Gene was asking me if I was retired. I kind of balked on that. How can I be retired? I don't really make enough money to be retired. Within the last 2 weeks, I can count. I'm doing less 14 and 16-hour work days these days. I just can't manage it anymore. Sometimes I just have to kind of crap out, because I'm getting older. But retired, that's an interesting concept. I'm getting paid back from Social Security for the work I put in. Past that point, I'm ready to partner with Gene on issues, because I'm in that category now, and a lot of what he says is sensible stuff. I just don't want this country to get divided over issues that we don't need to be divided over, because we have a media that has betrayed us. So many of the problems we have come from a media that pushes this partisanship, that forces us into categories and keeps pounding the drum of racism or sexism or whatever ism, and lets us forget what we have in common and what we have together. We are Americans first, whatever can be said of the other issues.
Anyone else? I guess I'm the last one standing. I thought Jim was going to go up, I guess not. Anyway, I want to thank our speaker. I think he did a terrific job here tonight. Got everyone thinking and asked a lot of questions. My background is I was a chairman for a labor union for 20 years in Chicago. And I successfully negotiated a 6-hour workday, which no one ever did. It was quite by accident. It was at O'Hare Airport. And we had to put on flagmen around the clock for 6 years and on the perimeter of the airport. And anyway, the guy shows up for work. We put on 3 shifts, 8 hours a day, and the guy shows up for work, and the airport guard says, "Park your car here, we'll drive you out there, security." By the time they got him out there, they were on overtime. So, company said, "We're not paying this overtime." I said, "Well, you set this up." They said, "Well, get here early." "You gonna pay me to get early?" "No, I'm not gonna pay me to get early, you got a problem." So anyway, they cut all the overtime, and these guys were working overtime. So I filed a day's pay for 6 men on the exit board for not being called to relieve 6 people to go to eat. And I filed another day's pay for 6 people working for being denied the right to eat. This went on for 4 months, finally, and for all the overtime. And so finally, we got to conference, and the division manager said, "We weren't gonna pay anything." I said, "Well, if you don't pay anything, we're gonna take it to arbitration, we're cleaning your clocks, it'll cost you a fortune." He says, "Well, he'd pay he would pay the extra board or the guy on the job, but he wouldn't pay for both of them." And he thought it was double jeopardy. I said, "Well, if you wanted, I knew it was that we went in arbitration on that too, but it'd take another 3 years. By that time, the job would be over." So I said, "Tell you what, we'll settle this thing right now. You pay 4 hours extra pay for everybody for 4 months, pay 4 hours extra pay for the extra board for 4 months, and pay all the overtime. We're out of here." Well, he settled it. And we paid, these guys were very happy. They got 2 months extra pay. And we got a 6-hour workday at 8 hours pay. And they got the same take-home pay they made in 6 hours and 8 hours. Well, the reason I bring this up is in 1938, they passed the Fair Labor Standards Act in this country. They reduced the work week from 60 to 40 hours, the work day from 10 hours to 8 hours. They did not cut the daily pay. They got the same take-home pay in 8 hours they made in 10 hours. It was a federal law, not a state law. It only applied to interstate commerce. And it only affected big business. It didn't affect small business. So every big businessman screamed like a stuck pig, but they had options. They could break up, demerge, form smaller corporations, get around the restrictive labor law, or they could spend money, become more productive, and produce more in less time than competition small business did in more time. Well, they got big egos. They spent the money. And then within 5 years, big business and labor went to each state legislature to put the small business people on a shorter workday because misery little company want to limit their competition. That's how we got the 8-hour day and the 40-hour work week in this country. That's how the rest of the world followed. That's how it was done. That's why I submit that maybe a 6-hour day is in the future. This automation, as Gene mentioned, automation constantly replaces people with machines, and machines don't pay taxes. If you took an extreme view of automation, you'd have one machine that did everything, and you have a handful of people running the service of the machine, the rest of us would be on welfare, or we'd all work a minute a day. The only way society can possibly share in the wealth of its capacity to produce is in working hours. Every so often, you got to shorten the workday. That to me is common sense. But then we have another problem, and that is our Congress is not going to vote for this because corporations are ruling the roost. We got the best Congress money can buy. Congressmen are owned by the corporations. Half of them are millionaires. They weren't millionaires when they went there. So what is the solution? What will Congress vote for? They'll vote for, in my view, they'll vote for free airtime the last 90 days of a general election. They get to keep the money they raise, plus they get free airtime. There's no history of a challenger being an incumbent. That being the case, if they would vote for that, then the Congress would represent the people that did the electing instead of representing the people buying their vote in Washington. Then you can put tariffs on corporations overseas. That's another problem we have, tariffs. We can't just put on tariffs on everything, because if we do, we're going to end up with like Smoot Hall, we're going to end up with a price war, and we're going to lose our butt in the process. What we need to do is put tariffs on those corporations that left town and went overseas on us, because they can produce at least what's produced here. They can produce in this country what's sold here. Yeah, otherwise, we're going to be like England. We're going to end up losing it all, and we don't need to have that happen to us. We got the best Congress money can buy. That's our problem. And that's what I see as a solution to shorten the workday, to put tariffs on corporations overseas, and to stimulate our Congress by having free airtime. Then we can get these things done. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Now, as far as Gene mentioned, as far as isms, I'm a non-ismist. There's no true ism in this world. There's no true communism, socialism. It doesn't exist. There's only degrees of ism. We have a mixed economy. We got some socialism, such that. That's how it's done. And with a mixed economy, you can handle all these isms and get your job done. So that's what we need to do. I better shut up while I'm ahead. I've gone way over 5 minutes. Anyway, give this to give us to Gene to finish up. You got the last word.
How long do I have? How long do I have?
As long as you
As much
need
as
to
you
take.
5 minutes?
You got whatever you
Well,
want.
people are getting ready to go, so
I know, you got till,
I don't want
you got till 9
to push
o'clock.
my
if you
luck.
want.
Okay.
You get to comment on all this.
This is part of what I was telling you. Just hold this one at your table and hold this one here for the time being. I'm going to explain what this is. Part of what I was saying is that the unions made a big change in 1995, and that this change is still going on. The unions are today participating with some other organizations in a drive to win paid sick time for all workers in Dallas. And that's what this is. The first, I don't know, 3 or 4 pages is instructions for me. Charlotte, did you get any signatures yesterday?
I've got 8, including a couple I got tonight.
That's wonderful. On the last page, you can sign the petition. But if you are not a voter in the city of Dallas, don't sign it. And of course, if you don't agree on paid sick leave, paid sick time for all Dallas workers, don't sign it. So I would like you to sign it if you will and pass it around. I only have 4 of them. Where's my other one? Well, I guess I only have 3. Okay. Well, I'll start this one at the back then. Well, Charlotte's already got one over there. Put this one on your table, okay? And I would like to get signatures if I can. By the way, they're hiring. Somebody got some money. I don't know if he got it from George Soros or not. But somebody got some money. It's not the labor movement, but somebody got some money and they're hiring people to do this. So Charlotte, if you want to make $15 an hour, and there's piles of people down there at City Hall. You could probably do the whole campaign down at City Hall because there's so many different things going on. Okay, this is my rebuttal. So, as to what was said, first of all, I think that Mr. Trump is an extremely controversial character, and a lot of union people voted for him, as you know. There were one thing that he said during the campaign that I really liked was that he was going to spend $1 trillion on infrastructure. Now that's, Obama wanted to do that too, but he didn't get to. And so I would really be for that if he would do that. They are now talking that he may be going to bring all the troops back from South Korea. I believe it's 30,000 of them. And some of the Republicans are putting him up for the Nobel Peace Prize. And I would not be surprised if he got it, and I'll tell you why. Because Nixon got one. So right after Martin Luther King got it, I think when Nixon was right in after there. If he brings back all the troops, I'll agitate for him to get the Nobel Peace Prize. You can count on it. On the tax bill came up once or twice. I just wanted to mention something that was in the paper this week in the business section in one of those little briefs. Apple, Apple's one of the biggest corporations in the world. Because of the tax bill, they're going to have $104 billion. I think it's 104. Might have been 108, but I'll just say 104 and be conservative. That they're going to give to their shareholders. $4 billion that they're going to give them in dividends. You saw this? Was it 104 or 108? You remember? Okay.
The same.
But they're going to give the smaller amount, they're going to give them in dividends. The larger amount, the $100 billion, they're going to use to buy back their own stock. Does everybody understand how that works? So let's say you own a little bit of stock and then they buy back a whole bunch of it, so there's not as much stock covering the whole wealth of the company, so your stock goes up like crazy. So this is a big gift to the shareholders, and of course the board members are shareholders, and the CEO is often a board member. I'm glad somebody brought up how corrupt the CEOs and the CEO pay is. It's kind of a disaster. And the AFL-CIO actually keeps track of how much more the CEOs are making than the workers. So I'm glad that came up. I'm glad the Middle East came up. And I'm glad that we seem to agree that it's a monumental crime, what the United States has been doing in the Middle East. And if Mr. Trump puts an end to that, I would certainly be for that. I'm glad that antitrust laws came up because, when they put the Sherman Antitrust Act in, they used it against corporations very briefly, and then they started using it against unions. And they don't use it that way anymore, but there was a long time there that the unions were the object of the antitrust laws. So I think that's a distortion, and I certainly agree with the brother who said that we are the victims of a corrupt elite in both political parties. And I don't think we're the only ones that think that. I think a lot of people think that. Now I want to say something. I don't know if I covered as many things as I really would have liked to. Get Off Petroleum, I thought that was a good one, especially because my science fiction novel the first one is based on the idea that they stopped using cars, and there was all kinds of fight back about it, and the people who wanted to drive their cars, were organizing to fight against the process because they wanted to keep driving their cars. We have to be in America united. I certainly agree with that. I certainly agree we should be against corruption. And I agree that the corrupt elite has lost touch with the people. And I agree that the media has betrayed us. I try to get people to donate to my radio show. We're just volunteers. KNON only has a staff of 4. The other 150 of us are all volunteers. And because we believe in what we're saying and what we're doing. So I try to get money, and I always say over and over again, everything you read and everything you see was either written by the bosses or approved by them. Think about that. Every movie, every book, every questionnaire, every newspaper, every television station is owned by a diminishing number of people. And they either wrote or approved of virtually everything you're going to hear or see. And then, of course, I say we're the exception, so give us money. Now I want to get back to Marx for a minute because of my sci-fi book. And I'm getting some ideas here for my sci-fi book. Because I'm just trying to come to grips with, what would people really do? What would they really want to do? And how would they do it? Now, the brother that said that people have to organize themselves and take over the government, that's exactly what I agree with. That's in my book. That people do organize themselves. How many are you using Nextdoor? It's an app, Nextdoor. Don't you find it pretty good?
It's interesting, but some guy had mentioned the other day that he was making posts about crime in the neighborhood, and his posts were being deleted, which makes me very curious about who's moderating it.
I don't know. Well, I don't even know who moderates mine, but today there was a guy who wrote about his wife surprised 2 burglars in their house, and it was only like 10 blocks from my house. And and my wife put something on about a guy who came up and tried our front door. And so I thought that was pretty good. And I think the Nextdoor thing may be what we're talking about people getting organized in small units in their localities, and then challenging the status quo from those small groups. Now I want to get back to Marx, because everybody claims to be a Marxist. I mean, all these countries, they overthrow somebody, and next thing you know, there's a dictatorship. And I'm not at all sure that that's what Marx said or meant. In my book, this is one of the arguments, because there's this other group that's running for everything, and they want to take down all the corporations in America. And my hero, whose name is Leo Torres, by the way, Leo Torres has to ask somebody else, well, how shall I answer them? And the other guy tells him, Marx never said that we wanted to tear down capitalism. He said we want to build on it. He believed that capitalism was a very good thing. It was way, way better than being a serf or being a slave. It was a big improvement. Capitalism was a big improvement. The fact that it drove down the prices of everything so that people could have more stuff was wonderful. So, in my book, Leo Torres answers, we do not want to take away all the corporations. We particularly, in my book, he says, we particularly want to keep Purina because they have helped us get through the famine by creating people chow. So I think that Purina could do this now, and I just think the food lobby won't let them. I think they can make people chow, and it's the same. You know how you give it to your dog, and then it says this is all you need. Even the vet says this is all you need: Purina chow, dog chow. So why isn't there a people chow? So Leo Torres will be in favor of that. They will be in favor of one of the big retail organizations, but they're not sure which one, because Amazon's the obvious one. Amazon has revolutionized the distribution of commodities. But it's owned by one guy. He's the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos. And so they're trying to decide if they can negotiate with Jeff Bezos or not, but they're not going to. See, it would not be wise to have some kind of revolution and then just go around destroying everything. Because we got some really good stuff. I mean, I like Amazon, for example. I like being able to get stuff the same day or the next day after I've ordered it, And I wouldn't want to give that up. So, and I actually think that might be what the Chinese are thinking about. A lot of people say, well, the Chinese are not communists because they have a market, and they have a certain number of capitalists operating in China now. And they've got the second largest economy in the world. Something over there that they're doing is working. So I don't know if that's what they have in mind, but it's what I have in mind. What I have in mind is building on what we have and having more of what we have and working less for what we have. And I think that's good. But I came here to argue that the labor movement is stronger today than it ever was. And I think that's not a popular opinion. I think that most people think that unions are on the wane. I just read a book, a very important book. In fact, the AFL-CIO sells the book. And it says that unions met their end during the Nixon administration. And he explains how they did it and how they messed up. And didn't support McGovern, and supported Nixon backhandedly instead, and that was the destruction of the labor movement. The unions are all over and done with. I don't believe that. I think that we are far stronger than we ever have been. I think we even have a good chance to win sick pay for all the workers in the city of Dallas. Just on the sick pay thing, you notice we had a waitress, do you think she stays home when she's sick? I don't know about these employers, I don't know about this restaurant, but a lot of food service workers have to work when they're sick. think about what that might mean to your food.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, a quick question, because this ordinance is going around. Now, what we're signing is to get this on the ballot.
get it on the
For
ballot.
it to be considered, for anybody that does business inside the city of Dallas has to provide, paid sick leave, a certain number of hours.
Yeah, it's like, it's 1 day for every 30 days you worked, or something like that.
In fact, I worked for the city of Dallas years ago, and they were very progressive themselves and provided sick leave. Not only could we have it for ourselves, and it didn't seem like there was much of a limit, but also, and this was 30 years ago, we could use it for a family member.
Yeah,
So this is asking that this be just put on the ballot, so anybody
Yes.
that wants this to be considered needs to sign.
yeah, you don't have to vote for it, but
Yeah.
if you want it to be on the ballot, please sign the petition.
Well, Austin, it was on public radio,
Yeah.
that Ken Paxton is trying to make
Yeah.
it illegal. They have it in Austin,
Isn't he darling?
and he's trying to make it illegal. He said
Yes,
it's unconstitutional.
Austin passed it by, the city council passed it. One of the city council persons initiated the idea, and they passed it in Austin, and it's now the law in Austin. But our Texas Attorney General, with malice toward none and kindness toward all, wants to destroy it, and whatever else workers might have gotten.
Point in passing, in the railroad industry, we negotiated it. We had sick days, and we got into problems with people proving that they were sick. They would fire them for not being, if they didn't prove they were sick. So we changed it and made it personal leave days. So you could, as long as all you had to do was take a personal leave day. One of your family was sick, you were sick, it didn't matter. They had to give it to you. So we had personal leave days, and you could carry them over from one year to the next if you wanted.
Most union people can take off when they're sick, but there are not very many union people. There's hardly any of them in food service. So think about somebody dripping snot, while they're frying hamburgers, because really, what else can they do? They don't make much money. They really can't afford to miss work.
Tom has talked a number of times about going to a 6-hour day. Well, I had a friend one time who gave me a longer day. He made a 25-hour dial for my clock. So if we went to a 30-hour clock, we could stay at an 8-hour day.
For a long time, workers didn't have clocks. They had whistles. The boss would blow the whistle, but the boss was always cheating on the time. So you could argue that today that working people are stronger today because they have clocks. They know when it's time to go and when it's time to get off. There are a lot of things that make us better informed, more capable, and capable of doing some of these wild science fiction things that we've talked about. And we said that people could get together in small units, and there it is, next door. It's already there. People are already started doing it. And it's kind of profound what's happening. And I'm just tickled to death to get to see some of this, and I hope it all works out for the better. Thank you.
Well, that's it for tonight. The formal meeting is over. Our speaker is welcome to stand by and talk to people here. They kick us out of here at 10 o'clock, just so you know. Anyway, see you next week, hopefully.
If you don't